If you're a wrestling fan who watches wrestling videos, or maybe you're on social media, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it doesn't really matter. You know exactly what I'm about to tell you is 100% true, because pretty much this happens all the time. Whether it's AEW or WWE, people often get so incredibly offended by the promos that typically reference the other company. And it's so incredibly funny to me because I don't think there's really that much of a problem with it. I think it's kind of funny, to be honest, to see this competitiveness between both companies, and not even really just competitiveness, but just the common sense, right? I think people forget this. There is a certain level of common sense that you got to realize, like, WWE and AEW should not be ignoring that the other company exists. And I'm not the only person that feels this way, because MJF just came out with a tweet and we got to talk about it. So for those who don't know what I'm aware about, MJF put out a tweet, and basically his tweet was very simple. He says, "I truly don't get why fans get up in arms when WWE mentions or references AEW, or when AEW mentions or references WWE. If you want to be treated like children, watch Elmo, or better yet, tell Vince Kennedy McMahon to start a new promotion." And I started laughing about this. I was on live stream talking about this a little bit, and then I just kind of thought, man, we should make a full video on this, because this is the strangest thing about wrestling tribalism that just makes me laugh. I think acknowledging certain things, for example, in this particular case, John Cena made a very specific reference to Cody Rhodes starting a promotion, and he said basically along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, but on Raw, John Cena said that he builds empires for billionaires and Cody Rhodes steals money from billionaires' kids, which was a reference to Tony Khan being the son of Shad Khan. And of course, immediately on social media, the AEW sickos are very offended by this. And it's so incredibly funny to me, because when you look at this going down, first of all, Cody Rhodes did start up AEW. Cody Rhodes did leave AEW. And in addition to that, why do we want WWE to pretend like that didn't happen? In fact, I would be more upset with the fact that WWE would try to insult our intelligence and try to ignore such a thing, especially because the creation of AEW is such a revolutionary thing that's happened in professional wrestling. So why should WWE ignore that? Also, at the same time, too, John Cena is not taking a shot at AEW. He's taking a shot at Cody Rhodes specifically. And so, obviously, this is not the only time where we've seen references. We just saw the reference on SmackDown with Drew McIntyre going through real glass and CM Punk walking by and laughing, and CM Punk making references to AEW. But also at the same time, too, it is very common for things to happen in AEW where they make references to WWE. And MJF is somebody who knows about this very well, because he had a whole storyline about leaving AEW, going to WWE, which, again, maybe that wasn't the best idea, because, I mean, why would you really want to go on live television talking about leaving for the competition? But to sit there and act like WWE doesn't exist, it is so silly to me. I find it really funny, to be honest. Like, I understand on commentary, for example, WWE isn't going to openly say, oh, the Lucha Bros, former AEW tag team champions, right? Like, that's not something you're going to hear. But the fact that they even acknowledge what they've done in Mexico or in TNA or something, like, I appreciate that, because why would you ignore wrestling history? Now, there are levels to this, and there are some gray areas, but the general idea that wrestlers cannot reference the other company in some capacity is kind of dumb, especially if it ties into something that the wrestler has done. For example, in NXT, you got Ethan Page, telling Ricky Starks, like, oh, you can't go back where you came from because, well, you burned bridges there. People were upset about this reference to AEW. They're like, why is NXT talking about this? But ultimately, those are two guys who came from AEW, and we are all very well aware of this. Why are people so offended? And I say this all the time, but the fake outrage is really the issue here. It's like people go on social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or TikTok, and they just act like they're mad about things that they shouldn't be mad about. And I think if you're taking shots at the other company, I think that's a little bit different. You got to be very careful how you take those shots, because I've said this a long, long, long time ago, but if you're not winning, right? Like, if you're not a winner and you're taking shots, you look dumb, right? You got to be careful with the petty shots, but just simply referencing No, man, there's nothing wrong with that. Jade Cargill was in AEW. If she has a feud with Charlotte Flair, I would literally bring that up. You went to AEW. Maybe you don't use the word AEW, but you reference like, hey, where you came from, you went on a dominant run. Nobody was able to take you out. Now you come to WWE and you think you could take me out, honey. Let me tell you, I am the queen for a reason. You did all that work just to get here and to get beat up, or something. I don't know. I'm just hypothetically saying, like, you can reference the fact that the person came from somewhere else, bro. And I don't know why people act like it's just such a big deal. And the fact that MJF is the one to be able to speak out about this, I think it just goes to show you guys that, like, nobody actually cares. The wrestlers don't care. The only people that care is the people that are trying to push tribalism. And it's so silly because, like, you have to just acknowledge that these two companies are not on the same level. The WWE is bigger. They're always going to be bigger. Like, it's not that big of a deal. There's nothing wrong with AEW not being the number one wrestling company. As long as they keep doing some good stuff, that's all that matters. And I know I would be a lot more offended to act like WWE or AEW doesn't acknowledge that these other companies exist. And it's so funny because nobody ever talks about it with TNA, but a lot of people have gone to TNA, from TNA to AEW. Speedball Mike Bailey comes from TNA to AEW, and for some reason TNA gets ignored. But you should acknowledge that. You should acknowledge, hey, like, Speedball Mike Bailey was a former X Division champion. He is one of the best wrestlers in the world, and he's come to AEW to test himself, to prove himself, to show himself against some of the best wrestlers in the world. You can deliver these kinds of lines on television without it being a petty shot. But why try to act like Speedball Mike Bailey didn't go to TNA and conquer that world over there? You should acknowledge it. It's just so strange to me. It's like, I don't get it, but I do like to kind of compare it to real sports. In real sports, players leave teams all the time, and commentary and, broadcast partners, they mention it. Like, hey, he was a great player here. He didn't gel well with this team, or he played great there. And, contract issues, whatever it may be, he decided to leave. Like, the only time people get offended about this stuff, though, is when it happens in pro wrestling, and I don't understand. And it is both sides. Like, MJF is 100% right. When the references happen on WWE, the AEW sickos get really pissed off about it. And when when AEW references WWE in some capacity, the WWE sickos get upset about it. But at the same time, too, as long as they're, like, treading carefully with the petty shots, it's not that big of a deal. And keep in mind, I know this is going to fly over people's heads because I know how YouTube works, but what I'm saying is very directly this. References and acknowledging something is not the same as taking petty shots. Drew McIntyre getting thrown through real glass is not a petty shot. It's not a petty shot at AEW, but you're acknowledging and referencing something that was a big deal, that was also relevant to Punk. That's my point. References are not a big deal. The petty shots, it just depends on the scenario. It's a gray area. But MJF is trashing wrestling fans, and I can't believe it. I low-key agree with Maxwell Jacob Friedman.